We have come now to the fifth study of the book of Exodus, Exodus chapter 9, verse 13 through chapter 11, verse 10. We look at the plagues number 7, 8, and 9, and the introduction to the plague of the firstborn. We notice that there is a heightening of the problems now. Many of the other events that have taken place have been against the land and against the water. Now we're going to have even more against the animals as well if they are not protected, and some more against the rest of the crops that have come up in the meantime. When we look at this now, we are seeing that the effect of God doing miracles really does not change the heart of Pharaoh whatsoever. Might just reflect on the fact that there are people who would say if there are troubles that come to somebody, then they turn back to God and they recognize that they have erred and they have strayed. But one is never guaranteed that when there are problems, that those problems are resolved by a tragedy happening to someone. Certainly one would think that with the major devastation that happens in the land of Israel, or in the land of Egypt, that the Pharaoh would have said, there is something going on here that I can't understand. But yet, even though there may be some sense of that, it really doesn't go to the point of him saying, I'm really being told I'm not the leader here. I acknowledge the Lord that you worship, and I am willing to step aside now and let him have his will with you. To that point, he never comes. So we come in plague 7 to the thunder and the hail. This is one where Moses' hand will be raised. That is the particular way that is mentioned. And God once again says that I am going to show the power that I have within me. I am going to act, and I'm going to exalt my name. This is kind of a little bit of a switch here at this point, that God's name will be exalted as holy. Now, that obviously is going to be something that will have an effect on the children of Israel. Not so sure that it has an effect on Pharaoh and his army, who would simply say that that Yahweh, who is trying to lead those people out, doesn't even exist, and somehow there are simply some miracles happening. It is nice that one notes here that there is enough care about the animals that they are given a 24-hour notice, and those who say we've had enough are willing also to say let's get our animals and get them taken back where they can be in protection. So God gives them now a chance to recognize that he is not going to act just on the spur of the moment, but if some of the people want to believe, then they can protect their own animals, and the ones who don't, then they lose their flocks as well. Now here it's also interesting that it continues this practice that the animals in Goshen, the land where the Israelites are living, are not affected. God says, I can make a separation between those who are within my care and those who are outside of it. But as happens in any war, it is very often the leaders who have themselves put in bunkers and protected, and it is the many common citizens who undergo terrible troubles, whether it is in Kosovo, or whether it is in Iraq, or whether it is in Ireland. Those who are the ones who hurt the most are probably the ones who are least able to protect themselves, or to even be in charge of making some changes. At this point, though, Pharaoh does something rather interesting, and the notes point this out. He says, I have sinned. Now, it might be that he's saying no more than I've blundered. One thing about leaders is they do not say, I've done wrong. Leaders may say, I made an error in judgment or something like that, but as we know even today, to say, I have done wrong is something that doesn't easily come out of the mouth. It's almost as if that's a sign of weakness. And Pharaoh will not will not hold that position very long, and very soon he will be back to his old ways. Once again, we remember that this is not just the story of a Pharaoh from long ago, but it points out that there are parts in everyone's life where the bullheadedness, the ability to try to stonewall and keep things from changing is deep within the fallen human heart. There's kind of a joke that says I'm principled and you're bullheaded. It says, I have my principles that I stand by, but you are just plain stubborn. And very often it is not that people just have a personality conflict, but that they really have an honest difference of the way that they look at life. If we were to live and let live, we would allow the people who live around us to simply go their own way. If God says, I'll love everybody the best I want to, you simply ought to love everybody and respect them, then I might be respecting somebody's hard-heartedness, somebody's anger against God. And there's plenty of that going around. People who say, I can't believe in a God who allows things like this to happen. And the plagues and the early settlement of the land of Canaan are two of the chief places where people will read this, and just as it hardened Pharaoh's heart, they will read this and they will say, I just simply either can't believe that this is godly, or I can't believe that this is a God that some people would still worship. It is only when a person comes to the end of his or her strength that a person might say, I've sinned, I need help. And thus, we're going to see at the time of Pharaoh, even after the 10th plague, he will still backtrack and try to go back to his old ways. He never really is able to fully comprehend and confess the fact that he is not in charge. His world is just so locked in. And we're never going to argue people into a different worldview. The best that we can do is to come at them from a point of weakness. Here, God was not finally interested in arguing or trying to bring Pharaoh around. He was interested in delivering the people from one who was so hard-hearted that he wasn't going to change his mind. Once again here, though, the comment is that God hardens Pharaoh's heart, and one would assume that that is simply by the activity. The next plague, plague number 8, is the plague of locusts. And most of us have probably never lived through a plague like this with little insects that completely cover the land and eat up everything that is left. Many would suggest it's over a several-month time period, of course, that these plagues take place, and not 10 plagues in 10 days. So there would have been a time when people might have thought, well, it's done now. Now we can go on to something else. God once again says, I have hardened the heart of Pharaoh, but I'm going to show what kind of fools these people are. Some have pointed out that much in the book of Exodus shows the wise way of life, which is to be a child of God, or the foolish way of life. But it's so easy to stand back and say, well, yes, we are such wise people, and those people back there, they were such fools. What's hard is for us to listen, just as it was hard for Pharaoh. And very often the good news can harden parts of our heart as we want to hold on to either our old sinful nature or some things that we don't want to give up on, or else we want to hold on to the fact that God ought not love everyone else. God says at this point that there is going to be a rather full ruin of the land. And this might lead us to reflect a bit on not just God against Pharaoh, but God against Satan, where in a much deeper sense, though it's not talked about directly here with the plague of locusts, God is out to destroy and ruin Satan's house, Satan's place of living, Satan's place that is, as far as Satan is concerned, going to have every human being who ever lived, because he won that first battle. But that final battle on the cross is going to be one where what looks like a ruin is going to be a victory. And Jesus says that when Satan lies, he speaks according to his own nature. His whole way of life is the very opposite. So it's no surprise that there will be people who will think that their way of life is correct and fight very, very hard for it. If I go directly to attack them, I'm probably going to lose. But if I look for that weak place, not with Satan, that he's lost, but if I look for that weak place, the place of hurt in the heart of someone else, that's the way in which God can come in. So we're called not confront other people with God's judgment. That happened here, but that is not the way we are called to go forth. We're to go forth with good news. News that would have come to the children of Israel, not to Pharaoh. And So Pharaoh begins at this point, the plague of locust happens with the staff of Moses being raised up in the air, and then for all of a sudden Pharaoh says, go. But when they say everyone's going, the little ones and everything, then he says, no, no, that's too much. So his answers are always very conditional. I'll let you go this far, but after that, I want to keep some control. I'm going to keep your children as hostages, or I'll keep the animals as the hostages. And once again, when that plague of locust comes on them, he says, I have sinned. And then Pharaoh goes forth from him, or Moses goes forth from Pharaoh, and another wind blows and blows all of the locusts away. So God says, if I want to, I can very, very easily fix the kind of problem that you have. Pharaoh asks for forgiveness. But once again, as the notes ask the question, what is forgiveness? Well, it is to say, I am sorry, and then to say, God, please help me amend my life. Repentance is not simply, oh, I'm sorry, put up with me, I'm only human. But it says, I've done something that offends the Almighty God. May God help me to change who I am and the way I am. We move on to the ninth plague, the plague of darkness. And this one is a rather odd plague. One would think that it wouldn't be too bad to simply have darkness, but it is such a thick darkness, and of course the people never know when the end is going to come. It is 3 days long, as we are told, and at this point, Pharaoh says, well, you can take all your kids, but leave all your animals. So he plays the old switcheroo and says, well, if you leave your animals, I'll let you take your kids. And then Moses says, well, we have to take the animals because we don't know exactly what we're going to have to sacrifice. This one was not announced beforehand. This one, because it doesn't really hurt anybody directly, though we don't know what other effects it had, this one just all of a sudden comes. And again, there is a separation between Israel and the land of Goshen. Once again, it is Moses' hand that is raised at this point, and so the result of this is that on and on, Pharaoh takes everything that's punched at him, kind of like Muhammad Ali used to be in the ring, and he continues to act as if everything is okay, and he can survive it. He whimpers only as long as he's in trouble. It's sort of like the person in jail who says, I'm sorry, when it's really simply, I'm sorry I got caught. God says, if you are really sorry, you will ask for some help to change who you are. But that never seems to come into play. And then finally, with the beginning of chapter 11, we move into the introduction to the last plague. And here we are told that God will finally act in such a way that the Pharaoh and his people will say, get out of here now. And it sounds very much like the end of a war, where the people would despoil those whom they had attacked. We need not think of too highfalutin an idea about what war is. Very often war is simply nothing other than a whole gang of people who gather together to go and rob someone else. And when they are done, they have their way with the women, they take all the possessions that they can, they kill all the men that they can, and they take over the countryside, or else they enslave the people who are there. But here God says, you are going to have in essence won a victory, even though you Israelites never raised a hand against anybody. So God says, I'm going to give you the victory, and they will be happy to give you everything they can and send you on your way. And we've heard this refrain more than once, that our land is just plain, utterly wiped out. All the other plagues could have had some sort of a prior history, where something like maybe the darkness of an eclipse, or maybe locust plagues or hailstorms had come in the past. That, of course, is quite common, though not bunched up like this. But this plague of the firstborn would be one where, unless the people actually moved against their own firstborn, killed their own firstborn as a radical act of offering to try and stave off the power of the gods, otherwise to have them die naturally, that wouldn't be just by chance. And from all indications, occasions they did not act against their children. We do have a story much later in the Bible about a king named Mesha from the country of Moab across to the east of the Jordan, who did sacrifice his own son in time of battle. And the understanding is that this was maybe a way to show the God how much he was hurting, that he'd give everything up for his God to come and act in his benefit. But here it is God taking the firstborn, and of course we'll get into that much more with the story of the Passover. Moses is told that he will not see Pharaoh's face again, at least not in a direct sense. And it says that Moses goes away in hot anger, that he finally has said, I am sick and tired of what's going on here. How could it be that someone can't see all of what is going on? So we have these plagues. We have these challenges now to the authority of the Pharaoh. In a human sense, it would seem like the pharaohs of this world are usually winning. It would seem like no matter what comes along, instead of saying that this is a wake-up call, it is simply some unknown force of nature or some sort of magic that takes place, which results in some terrible effect. But you'll notice that in most cases the pharaohs probably hurt the least of anybody in this country. And the hardening that goes on, as we've talked about with the different terms of some being that he just kind of grabs on tighter, and some that his heart just weighs down and he's heavy, and some that he is simply hard and stubborn against what is going on. All of those kinds of things are the kind of reaction that can only be resolved by the action of God. The story that Luther would use, that when the sun shines on wax and wet concrete, it hardens the concrete and it softens the wax. And that is the way God works. We never quite know whether or not a person is going to be softened or hardened by the message from God. But for us, we are not to go out and proclaim the plagues, the condemnation, the punishment. We are told to say that God has delivered us from all that. And so, very different from this time period, we get to proclaim that good news. It may still harden people. It has and it will. But for those who are turned and who come to know their Lord through the caring and the gentle loving and the final ability to take seriously a merciful God, then that will have eternal consequences. Thank you as you continue this study. Next week we'll have a chance to look at the Passover and the final deliverance of the people. God's continued blessings to you.